Hi, welcome to the coffee table and me in my climate strike kurta, ready for a great show. But it's true, I'm not just being flippant. I'm sure, as you guys know, Fridays for Future has announced the global climate strike for this year is on March 19th, and their hashtag that they're running with is called No More Empty Promises. So we thought that this is a really opportune moment to talk about the ongoing climate crisis in the world. How does that affect our particular part of the world? And most importantly, for the purposes of this show, and generally, of course, is how climate change is affecting women specifically all around the world. It's surprising. I think that a lot of times when we think about this, we don't think about the gendering of climate change, but it's real and it is really important. And I'm so happy to have three amazingly intelligent specialists, activists on the show to help unpack the issue. So joining me on set today is Sarah Hayat, who is a lawyer and a consultant who specializes in climate change law. She has been advising the government on Pakistan's nationally determined contributions for the UNFCCC and is the main member of Climate Action Pakistan and is also the vice chairperson for the Lahore High Court's Committee on Air Pollution and Solid Waste Management, amongst many other things. Also joining us on set today is Tabitha Spence, who is a geographer focused on water and climate politics. She was part of the people's mobilizations in Paris during COP21. She's active with the Asia-Europe People's Forum and is part of Progressives International. And joining us all the way from England, across the internet, is Namira Hamid, who works in the clean energy and policy sector in the United Kingdom. She's worked with the government of Punjab on renewable energy and governance and is the founder of Women in Energy, which is a network for professional women in the energy, climate, and power sector. Welcome to the show, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very excited. So, Sarah, we sort of every year we talk about climate change on the coffee table, and this is a conversation that keeps sort of, I think, growing and developing and becoming more and more nuanced as we go along. But for the sort of purposes of jogging our memory, or let's say for at least for sort of between last year and now,
Right.
what are we looking at has anything new come up when we're talking about climate change and the issues that we face, or is it still just fairly standard?
Well, the definition is still fairly standard.
Yes,
and it's
but
still,
what is it? Tell me.
It's still long-term weather patterns of a region, atmospheric changes, but that are getting influenced or impacted due to human activity or anthropogenic activity. So basically, we are ruining the natural system and causing global warming. Which in turn is having extremely bad impacts on our planet and our people. So that's climate change in a nutshell. The best way to gauge climate change, understand it, is to look at the impacts it has.
Right.
And we should restrict them to Pakistan, I guess. So for Pakistan, we're looking at glaciers melting, we're looking at erratic weather patterns, including changing monsoon patterns, the floodings in Karachi in 2020, probably one of the most sort of glaring impacts of climate change, Karachi's heat wave. Global temperatures are going to rise. Pakistan or the global south will suffer will suffer a higher increase in temperature than the global north. For us, climate change-induced migration has become a reality. So people don't have enough livelihood because agriculture gets impacted, and then they move away from places where they can't earn any money, and it's generally rural to urban. So our already sort of collapsing cities just can't take more migrants. Then we've got our the very, very major impact on agricultural output, which just can't be stressed enough. Food insecurity is becoming a concern for Pakistan. Flooding, natural disasters, cyclones. These are all sort of like very basic impacts of climate change.
And Tabby, the sort of conversation around the strike this year, from what I understand, is that they're sort of pushing for science-based short-term climate targets. So what are short-term climate targets?
Well, 2020, first of all, I'll say, was supposed to be the year that greenhouse gas emissions peaked and started to decline rapidly over the next 30 years, and completely being completely ending by 2050, because we cannot continue burning all of these fossil fuels. They are what is contributing to the greenhouse effect and all of these impacts that Sarah was just talking about. So, I mean, this year was a pivotal year. And now what's different about this time as well is we're facing our first global pandemic in 100 years, which isn't completely separate from the climate crisis. In fact, you find the roots of both this epidemic, this public health crisis and the climate crisis in this economic system that requires that we continue deforesting, eating up forest land for conversion for large-scale agriculture and industrial agriculture, continuing to tap more and more fossil fuels in the ground, which so many have already been, there are 12 times as many fossil fuels in the ground as can be burned in order to stay within the carbon budget. So
what does that mean?
The carbon budget. So if we are going to completely end greenhouse gas emissions, or almost completely by 2050, when everything we do depends on burning fossil fuels, oil, coal, gas, all of these things put carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. We have to switch away from using fossil fuels to power our lives, to power our world. And so when you actually break down, okay, how are we going to do that over the 30 years, which the scientists are telling us we have to have 50% chance of staying below 2 degrees of warming. This is a lot of technical things, but people I think by now are familiar with 2 degrees versus 1.5. Basically, the scientists have given us a budget. 420 gigatons of carbon dioxide can be emitted, and no more than that. That means no more fossil fuels beyond the amount that will emit 420 gigatons of carbon dioxide can be burned.
So what is happening if the carbon dioxide is a problem because it's eroding the ozone layer? That's the sort of main reason why carbon dioxide needs to be controlled?
Well, is this for Tabby or is it?
No, it's right. For anybody but you.
So the carbon dioxide really doesn't have much to do with the ozone layer. I mean, not technically when you dance it. So carbon dioxide is part of greenhouse gases. And climate change is because of greenhouse gas emissions. Or global warming is because of greenhouse gas emissions. So you've got your, and carbon dioxide is very potent in the sense that when it's emitted, it will form a layer around your planet. Think about it like this. It forms a layer around the planet, and then it keeps storing heat. And by some estimates, carbon dioxide emitted today will stay in the atmosphere for about 1,000 years.
What?
And will keep absorbing heat and thereby increasing the temperature of our planet.
Which is why we need to kind of rein that in, and which is why we have that cutoff point where it can't get more than that.
Absolutely. And another thing about carbon dioxide that really has to be mentioned is that carbon dioxide emitted in Pakistan can spread across the atmosphere and impact people in Brazil. And vice versa. So, which is why climate change is a global issue, and greenhouse gas emission reduction anywhere on the planet actually benefits all of us.
Absolutely. So, hi Namira, can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly. Hi, Meena.
Excellent. Hi, welcome to the show. So, Namira,
Thank you so much for having us.
It's a pleasure. So, Namira, you work on clean energy. So, like Tabby's just been talking to us about how all our energy right now is centered around fossil fuels, and using fossil fuels means that the carbon load is immense at the moment. So what do we mean when we talk about clean energy?
No, that's an excellent question. So just adding more to what Sarah and Tabby have said before, what we need right now is a transition to clean energy. And what we mean by that is not just a shift from traditional fossil fuels to renewable energy. It's actually turning the political and economic systems completely upside down. Some of the terminologies being used internationally is that we need a Green New Deal. So basically, you're using renewable energy sources to enable states and countries to improve their own energy security. And this makes the sort of traditional oil and gas dependency and geopolitical sort of constraints it loses the potency and it changes the dynamics that we see internationally. One very interesting anecdote that I remember is that in Germany, they have, they're leading the clean energy transition. It's actually a part of their foreign policy to promote clean energy transition all over the world. And that's just incredible. And they compare it to how it's the equivalent of the project to get the first man on the moon. That's how incredibly important this transition is.
So, Sarah, what does it mean when we talk, because we're talking about how the Earth is getting hotter, and like Tabby said, the difference between 2 degrees and 1.5 degrees. Well, what does that mean, that the Earth is getting hotter by that much? And how does it translate?
Okay, so at a very basic level.
Not extremely basic, medium basic.
All right, medium basic level. We've got the Paris Agreement, which is the international, currently the international instrument that's governing climate change, right? Across the globe, and almost all countries are a signatory to it. The US is back in post-Trump also.
Indeed.
Well, so the Paris Agreement says we've got to curb our temperature increase to 1.5 degrees.
Okay.
Globally. Like I explained, climate change is causing global warming, which then in turn is having weather impacts and then impacts on human lives and communities. And so if the temperature increase goes beyond 1.5 to 2 degrees, by some estimates, 50 million more people will be migrating.
Because where they live will be underwater.
Will be underwater, or there'll be no agricultural growth there, so there'll be no food, there'll be food insecurity, it'll be too hot to live in some regions of this planet.
Or too cold also, because that's also what's sort of happening with the weather.
Right, so I mean, this is a technical aspect, and cold waves are actually, yes, they're weather oriented, but they're not, I mean, they might not fall entirely under climate change, but heat definitely does.
Yes.
So heat waves definitely do. And Pakistan, by the way, often has some of the highest recorded temperatures globally. And this happens, yes, this happens every year. Some cities in Quetta, even in Sindh, some cities in Balochistan, forgive me, and even in Sindh, they record temperatures that we can't fathom, like up to 51 degrees at times. So, so that's the difference. Like we've got to keep our global temperatures to 1.5 degrees and not let them get to 2 degrees.
So right now, what's the temperature?
It's between 1.5 and it's between 1.1 and 1.3.
Okay, so
we're already in that,
close to the lower limit of it.
which is actually a very high limit, because the people of the Global South in previous international climate meetings actually argued that 1.5 is what it will take to keep us alive, particularly people in coastal cities like Karachi that will be underwater, and people of small island nations, because at 1.5 degrees, that's how much the oceans are projected to rise, is enough to devastate coastlines and inundate small islands.
That is across the world, really.
Globally.
We're going to take a very quick break at this crucial junction. We'll be back in a second. Stay with us. Welcome back to the coffee table. We're having an extremely important conversation with environment activists Sarah Hayat, Tabitha Spence, and Namira Hamid. Now, before the break, Tabitha, you mentioned that there is a connection between the pandemic that we are going through and climate change. And I'm extremely intrigued, and now you must tell me, what is this connection?
I mean, in a nutshell, public health officials have been predicting a pandemic, and not just one pandemic, but many pandemics in the coming years as the ecological system continues to be broken apart. And so, you know, the assault on nature, in a sense, is responsible for the climate crisis, but it also is responsible for these pandemics. And that's because when you destroy a forest or you destroy a habitat, the species that live in that habitat actually find themselves more often in mixed spaces with more humans, and there's more of an opportunity for interaction and cross-species transfer of pathogens. But so clearing a forest as I just said, it contributes to destroying habitats, but two, it's no longer serving as the lungs for the planet, pulling in carbon dioxide and reducing the warming, the potential warming. So that's also a direct.
So it's really about sort of maintaining that balance where everything is allowed to live and thrive where they should be.
Absolutely.
That's, it sounds so simple, but it's also so scary at the same time because it just keeps happening. And I think this is where, Namira, what you said about how climate change is not just activism, but it is also about addressing the political systems and the economic systems that allow this to keep happening.
Absolutely. No, the question is no longer if this clean energy transition is possible.
Yeah.
The conversation is now how to make it happen faster and faster. And again, something that Tabby said, we do recognize that most of the climate change has been as a result of what industrialization took place in the sort of northern hemisphere, and the effects are going to be more pronounced for developing countries in the south, and that's just unfair. But what it means also is that all of us together need to change these political and economic systems. So part of my work is also working with policymakers on what are the next steps. What is it that we can work on?
Yep.
And we have the solutions in front of us. Government of Punjab and government, all provincial governments together with the government of Pakistan have some policies for renewable energy integration, for electric vehicles. But what we actually need right now is a holistic green energy, clean energy transition policy and acts which make it compulsory to follow and abide by.
I'm really glad that you brought up how industrialization has been a phenomenon of the global north, but the global south is the one that's suffering the most. So clearly climate change is not experienced equally by communities around the world.
Well, climate change is experienced by everybody.
Yeah.
I'd like to stick to that narrative. But yes, it's not, it is not an equitable sort of impact of climate change. And that's got a lot to do with the financial resources that a country has.
Right.
Apart from their geographical location on the globe, on the planet, which we really can't do anything about.
Yeah.
But what we can do about, something about is the access to resources that a country has, or whether they are trained and whether they are equipped to actually use those resources properly to combat climate change, right? So even
what
if a
kind
country,
of training would that be, for example?
well, specialists. You need specialists. You need governments that take climate change seriously. You need and climate change awareness is something that everybody tends to bypass as being too basic or not necessary. But policies and laws fail because there is no climate change awareness. And I work in this sector, so I can vouch for it 100%. And then on top of that, you also need gender-specific policies, because an inequitable impact of climate change also includes the different impacts on gender, on different demographics. Those who are financially marginalized suffer more, women suffer more, children suffer more. So you need policies that cater to this. And also, I mean, at some point, I want to come back to the nexus between COVID and climate change.
Yes, please do.
It's something, Tabby has already spoken about it. It's something I get asked a lot in my public awareness.
So once and for all, you can address the situation and then send them a clip of this show and be like, here's the answer.
No, well, I have a fairly unpopular opinion on this.
Ooh, intriguing.
Which is that there really is no organic connection between COVID and climate change. It's a very forced one by us.
Okay, bye, Sarah.
Bye, Sarah. But as Tabby said, she's right. She's right. When you're cutting down trees, animals are going to come into places where they're not supposed to come, basically. But with COVID, it's just a man who decided he wanted to have bat soup and then triggered a pandemic globally. What needs to be stressed is that climate change will cause other pandemics. This is
not this one.
They will come, yes. And even right now, as the ice in our polar regions, the global polar regions is melting, something called permafrost.
Yes.
we're identifying bacteria and viruses there that we have no antibodies for, we have no vaccines for, and they are going to spread. And then in higher temperatures, again, a byproduct of climate change, pathogens tend to travel further.
Yes.
So so climate change will exacerbate the spread of pandemics. And that right now, that is pretty much the only connection. Sorry, I'm just going to say one more thing.
No, please.
COVID and climate change are linked in the sense that people during lockdowns have seen the very tangible effect of decreasing greenhouse gas emissions.
Yes.
When industrial activity stops or vehicular emissions are reduced. But that's not something we can sustain. We can't stay stationary. So what we need are actually policies that will allow human development, that will allow economic development. And I know Tabby is going to counter me on this. But we need enough to at least sustain our economies, global economies. But we also need to make sure that we aren't harming the planet anymore in the process.
Yeah, because I think that the time is now. Yes, Tabby, we were like.
No, actually, I completely agree with what you're saying. I think when you talk about climate justice, we're focusing on the difference in both impacts and causes of the crisis. And those who are causing this crisis, if you just think about the top 1% of the population, the richest top percentage of the population, they account globally for double the poorest 50% of the globe's emissions.
Wow.
So really, I mean, the idea is that growth of all kinds everywhere has to stop. That's not the argument. The argument is that growth of certain industries by certain vested interests has to be halted completely, and redistribution of wealth and resources needs to flow from that 1%, the richest elite in the world, which are mostly men sitting in the U.S. And white,
who are making
also
the most money and using the most resources and polluting the planet the most.
Exactly. And they made a killing off of this pandemic, while other people were suffering all around the world because of these lockdowns and the implications for their jobs and access to healthcare and all sorts of things. They made $100 billion plus in the last year alone.
Which is probably the worst economic year for most people in the world. And I think that I'm glad that we're talking about finances also now, because this kind of leads us back to women and climate change and how they are having to deal with the environment. And the thing is that 70% of the world's poor comprises of women.
Yes.
And like you said in the previous segment, financial security or insecurity is a massive reason why climate change is affecting people's lives in so many different ways. But women are especially hardest hit for a lot of, again, it sounds like really obvious reasons, but they snowball.
Yes.
So, for example, if, women and water, let's say. Now you tell me, because I don't want to hog the conversation. Be like, I know about women and water.
No, you're right. Climate change impacts women inequitably, which means it impacts them more
than men.
And you think that this is, and a lot of people ask me. I try to raise a lot of awareness on this point, and a lot of people don't want to believe me. Till you actually discuss and tell them this is what's happening at the grassroots level. Absolutely. Now take water, for instance. Women in Pakistan, this is a study I worked on myself for Oxfam, are traveling in rural areas of Pakistan, are traveling an average distance of about 2 kilometers daily, sometimes multiple times a day, no matter what the weather, extreme heat, cold, rain, to get water from wells or hand pumps scattered in the region in metal pots that they'll carry on their heads and then bring them back to their houses. I've spoken with these women. They complain of headaches. They complain of backaches. They complain of hair loss.
Wow.
Yes, which is yes, absolutely. They complain of feeling despondent. They, why should they be spending all their time collecting what's a basic human right? And the World Health Organization says that women who travel large distances to collect water are actually more malnourished. Women and girls who travel long distances to collect water are more malnourished than their male counterparts if they ever go.
These are global statistics. This is not just Pakistan specific, but this is happening in so many countries.
In the developing world.
In the developing world. Extremely important. Yes, Namira.
No, just to add more to this, we have global statistics and studies that corroborate this claim. So, for example, during the 1991 cyclone disasters in Bangladesh, 90% of the 14,000 deaths were women. Also with, women and boys and young girls are more likely, 14 times more likely to die than men during a disaster.
But why is that, Namira?
I mean, again, this shows the socioeconomic conditions of most of our societies.
Yes.
So in countries in the global south, our societies are structured in a way that women, and especially younger children, are more prone to disasters. Even in Hurricane Katrina, you had, African-American women and their children, a group which is more likely to be poor, lack healthcare, and earn low wages, which is exactly what we see in the global south as well. So having said, the effect of climate change is more pronounced on women, and there's a very strong nexus of gender disasters and climate change. On the flip side, it's so interesting to see that more and more women, young educated women joining the professional fields, are choosing to join the clean energy sector. So, for example, last year, there was a study that indicated you have 32% women working in renewable energy and clean energy sectors compared to 20% in the fossil fuel and dirty industries. And it's fascinating. You see women choosing these newer fields because maybe that's what the universities are teaching, but also women do care more about what would happen to the next generation, what would happen to their children. And they have, this sort of urgency to tackle climate change through this.
Absolutely. And I think that it would be to say that that's not because women are sort of, it's inbuilt into women's psyche to be nurturing and caring about the environment. It's just that women firsthand, more often than not, understand what it means for these sort of things to happen.
Actually, before Tabby takes this on, let me just say that Namira raised the 14 times more women likely to die in natural disasters, or they do die.
Yes.
The reasons for this are actually because women don't have the same socialization opportunities that men have. So women don't know how to swim. They don't know how to climb trees. And girls, and the same for girls, like we never get the chance. In the cyclone of Bangladesh in 1991, many women refused to leave their houses when rescue teams came because their clothes were wet and they were clinging to their bodies. It was a parda issue at that time. A lot of women refused to leave because they didn't have male relatives or a mehram present at that time. So they didn't want to leave it, and so they chose to die. And this is true. There are actual documentaries and these documented cases. Those women chose to die instead of leave with men they're not related to. And so many women across Pakistan can relate to this. I mean, when natural disasters strike our coastal belt or our northern areas or our country, a lot of women end up suffering a lot more just because they were never taught how to swim, or they never had the chance. They couldn't jump into a canal, or they couldn't jump into the sea and learn how to swim a little.
We'll take a very quick break and come back in just 1 minute. Stay with us. Welcome back to the coffee table. We're discussing climate change and its impact on women with environmentalists Sara Hayat, Tabitha Spence, and Namira Hamid. Before the break, we were talking about how climate change has had these almost brutal effects on women's lives, and poverty is a really big factor in that.
So what Sara described was harrowing. What we're seeing is particularly in the global south, the kinds of issues that women are facing in the face of the climate crisis. But we also see across the board globally that women earn less money than men for the same amount of work, and therefore have fewer resources at their disposal in times of crisis to deal with it.
Right. So not only are they more vulnerable, they also have less access to, and like Sarah mentioned, training and awareness and just the actual capacity to do something about it. Like I was reading about how most women, a lot of women are agricultural workers, but they don't own the land that they work on. And that makes a massive difference, because when women do own the land, their output increases more than male-owned land agricultural output, which is fascinating.
Is it? Yeah, that's interesting. I actually wasn't aware about that particular aspect of it, but yeah, I also think when we think about the side of causes, again, like you started the segment by talking about how it's not as though women are necessarily inherently like nurturing and caring, but I think we have been socialized, you know, over the years to be more in tune with our material reality, the food, the keeping of the house, the water, as Sarah was talking about, and having to engage directly with all of those aspects, and therefore we're more aware, I think, of the fact of that all of that is fragile. All of that can go away in a heartbeat. And
there's also this triangulation between scarcity of resources and gender-based violence as it is. So if we throw into the mix the strain being caused by climate change, which means that, you know, if the water is drying up, if the rivers are getting saltier and there's less fishing to be had, and, you know, so on and so forth, again, that is sort of circling back to women and women's safety and women's and families and children being able to exist in a safe space.
Absolutely. For women in rural parts of our country, in most of the agricultural world,
which is again global south,
which is
most of
the global south, their sources of income are generally restricted to agriculture or livestock rearing or fishing. Or income through fisheries. Climate change affects all three of these sources of income adversely. And again, then, like Tabby and you mentioned, women are generally not allowed to exercise their inheritance rights. So they're not allowed to hold land in their name, which means that when it comes down to not having access to earn a livelihood, then women are left with nothing, basically. And people think that in our part of the world or rural parts of our country, women don't contribute to the household. That's not true. If you actually go and talk to them, which I do when I go for my climate change related work or case study related work, women are earning to support the household, and their sources of income are being impacted by climate change. So climate change is affecting them a lot more than men, who will the next day get up, become mechanics or laborers, or will go off to a city and, you know, hopefully find a job, whereas women will be left to look after their children, and in abject poverty.
So Namira, there is, like, I was looking at a UN again report, and it says that there is a direct connection with worsening deforestation and air pollution with gender inequality. So it seems that as one increases, the other one does too. So how do you feel that translates in a lot of in policies around clean energy, as it were? And I'm just sort of curious about the approaches that women are taking now to kind of innovate and find solutions.
No, that's such a good point. There was a German study conducted in 2010, which shows that men had higher electricity consumption due to higher intensity of use. And this is in line with the explanation that women and men have different attitudes towards consumption and environment, and that women are more willing to make efforts to save energy. And just, in line with that, one of the sort of part of the work that I do in Pakistan, we have a Women in Energy Professional Network. And the reason for this came about because when you enter the professional field, it's a completely male-dominated sector. And, you have these important decision-making happening, decisions that impact the entire, all the citizens of Pakistan. And it's a male-dominated room full of, sort of older men making decisions on behalf of women. And that's not on. You need a perspective to have women voices in these policies. The work that we're doing is basically building this culture of having women leaders in Pakistan who speak on topics of climate change, environment, clean energy, exactly the conversation that you're hosting for us today. We want to make that sort of normalized in office boardrooms. And I'll also add, what we're seeing right now is that there are a number of startups that are sort of focusing on clean energy or new technologies or even solar power that are headed by women in Pakistan. You have CEOs, you have founders, you have director generals, all women in Pakistan that are leading this transition for clean energy, and especially the climate strike that is coming up very, very soon. Some of the main organizers for climate strike in Pakistan are young women. They're students, they're young professionals, and it's incredibly amazing to see these women leading the forefront for climate change and clean energy transition in Pakistan.
My sofa is amongst that group. But Tabby, do you feel like, what are the impediments that we are still facing when it comes, because this conversation just keeps on happening, and there is so much evidence and statistics and science to back all of this up. But do you think that it's essentially kind of boiling down to that 1% that just has so much power that it's just, or I suppose you could say on one level, it's like climate change and capitalism are just hand in hand, and dismantling one is dismantling the other?
I mean, dismantling capitalism will only deal with the climate crisis if it's done soon enough. And it may not even entail entirely dismantling capitalism.
Or like Sarah said, modifying it, finding a way to make everything work.
Certainly, completely overturning the use of fossil fuels and certain practices that are polluting is a confrontation to the capitalist system, which is a patriarchal system, which is a system rooted in the values of competition, power, dominance, control, rather than people in their communities and in their regions actually taking control of their own resources for their own uses.
Yes, because this happens a lot as well, doesn't it? That, again, the global north will exploit resources from the south, take it away, pollute the planet with it, make money, and the south is left with nothing.
We're seeing it happening every day, and this comes back to your point of why is it that we've known, at least all of our adult lives, and young people, have been so aware of it from childhood that this is happening. Everything is falling apart around us, and yet the systems that are causing the crisis are only intensifying. While we have people, we have the young women that Namira was talking about, and so many others who know we have the existing technologies to transition away from these polluting systems of production and trade, and we have that technology. It's being actually the transition is being obstructed, and that's a political reason. I mean, it is okay, I'm as happy as anyone that Trump is out of the White House. The United States, the world's biggest polluter, is in the process of re-entering the Paris Agreement, which is enormously important. But Joe Biden, he's supposed to be seen as this person who's going to be able to take on the challenges that we face. And just looking at that one of the most powerful countries in the world, we don't actually see nearly enough happening fast enough. Joe Biden isn't banning fracking. He did cancel the Keystone XL pipeline, but other pipelines for more use of dirty tar sands oil, are actually being constructed right now, and people's lands are being grabbed to do that, including Native Americans and farmers.
So again, it seems like it's a lot of countries that are responsible for most of the pollution aren't acting fast enough. And clearly it's political and economic, but then sadly and weirdly, if there's no planet that is livable, then none of this matters. So, Sarah, sort of before we kind of wrap up the show, what can we do?
Yes, that's a very important question. And I think most people hearing this show will probably, or watching this show will probably want to know now what, after all the depressing information we've given them. So the answer is simple, once again. We need gender-specific policies for climate change, for disaster risk management. And these policies are also not supposed to be very complex.
Yes.
Like when I tell you that women cannot, they have restricted means of earning their livelihood, why not have policies that will help women diversify their livelihood, And it can be something as simple as, like, when I went to Sindh, I saw women who were losing out on agricultural income were talking about wanting sewing machines or just this basic training on how they could sew and embroider clothes that they could then sell to Karachi or Hyderabad to sell.
Which would be like a tertiary skill to have.
Absolutely. Just basically, the aim should be to diversify their income or livelihood. Then we definitely need more water points for women. We need more wells, we need more hand pumps, we need to identify areas. Then we need more awareness for our girls and women.
I was going to ask about that, is that as sort of citizens and as individuals, in a global context also, what are the kind of things that we can do to kind of help? Is it useful to pressurize local government? Is it important to kind of read up on policy, conserve water, stuff like that?
Yeah, well, at an individual level, we should be doing all of it just because we are good citizens.
Yeah.
I think that's important. That's because you're a good human. You shouldn't be wasting water or wasting electricity. But you should definitely be talking a lot more about climate change. You should definitely be talking a lot more about the environmental or the gendered impacts of climate change. Just accepting it, being aware of it, talking to your children, your neighbors, your parents. Like, for example, everybody asks me, how can climate change impact women more, because they live in the same house as a man, they live in the same community.
Yeah.
But when I talk about it, it's so simple. People tend to grasp it, and then I hope that they will sort of circulate it more, and that's very important, because the more awareness we have, the more we can ask the government for more cogent policies to deal with these issues, and the more we end up helping people.
So there's definitely something to be said for an individual understanding of where we stand, and the more of us that are aware and active and actually proactive about all of this information, we can make a difference. Of course, I don't think we can go and attack big pharma or the 1%, but everybody's input can make a difference. And me and my kurta bid you adieu. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for being on the show. It's a wonderful conversation. If you're watching this on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe. Please share this show. It's part of the awareness building. Read up, ask the right questions, write letters to your local government. Don't waste water. And go to the climate strike on the 19th of March in your city, wherever you can find one. Again, thank you for watching, and we will see you next time on the coffee table. Bye now.